Good morning and welcome to Atheist Talk on KTNF AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Good morning to all of you joining us locally by radio and streaming online. We appreciate you tuning in. Today is Sunday, May 27th, and I'm your host, Hertzie Hertz. I am in studio with Maddie Love, Marissa Alexa McCool, and Stephanie Zavan. This is an open conversation, and we welcome and encourage listener interaction with your phone calls to 952-946-6205, your emails to radio@mnatheist.org, or tweet us at @atheisttalk. The phone number is only available when we're live, but you can always email or tweet whether we're live or you're listening to the podcast. Maddie, Marissa, Stephanie, welcome to Atheist Talk.
Thanks. I feel like it's my first time all over again.
Well, this week we are going to be talking about Marissa's new book that is coming out, which I have the name right here, Once Unspoken, correct?
Yes.
Excellent. And do you want to tell us, what was the inspiration for this?
So I made my first public appearance as my true self in the UPenn production of the Vagina Monologues back in 2017. And I got close with a lot of the people who were in the cast, and a lot of them talked to me about trans issues because it turns out I was the first trans person in 17 years of the production to ever be in the show. And one of the things that really irritated me about that was that they used the trans monologue and 5 cis people performed it. And that seemed weird because it came on right after my part. And you could see the people in the audience looking at them, then looking at me, then looking, So that was an experience. But then they invited me back as a spotlight speaker, and I could perform my own piece. And what I noticed was that I was being invited to perform my own piece, but everybody else in the show had to deal with the very, very strict licensing of that particular show. Specifically, a girl named Megana, who is a Southeast Asian woman. She was wearing a full sari, and she had to fight for one sentence. She wanted to say, "My sari is not an excuse to fetishize me," and she had to fight for that. And I also noticed there were about 70 women in the show. Maybe 10 of them were of color, and I was the only trans person. And I obviously wasn't a student anymore. So it's like someone's not feeling represented by this show. And it looks like a lot of people aren't. And that was what Megana was saying, was that I don't feel welcome here. I don't feel like this show is about us. I don't feel like this show is about people like Marissa. And, that's one kind of trans person. Never mind that there are no trans men involved at all. And they were born with vaginas. Why are they irrelevant? And, we kind of had that moment of, well, why don't we write our own show? Ha, 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 ha. And then it was like, hey, why don't we write our own show? So that was kind of the whole inspiration behind it. And Megana, she is a Fulbright scholarship winner. She's heading overseas now that she's graduated. And I was like, you have to write the foreword. Your voice needs to be heard. You are an incredibly special person. And it was like, I'm going to put out feelers. I want women and people of color. I want trans men. I want trans women. I want queer people, as many different kinds of people that can possibly be represented here, because we wanted to make a story that was in the vein of the Vagina Monologues, but not just for white cishet 90s feminists.
Yeah, that actually was one thing that I definitely found reading through, was just the idea of how dated it is in the sense of people of color, trans, but then, and somebody had brought up another part, which was, the school shootings and things like that, which affect, I think, everybody in that sense. And it's just like, yeah, these sound like they need to be updated.
Right. And that is not to say that it's a bad show, nor is it to say that any of us are ungrateful for the conversations it did get started. But I'm sitting there in a theater with mostly kids who are 10 to 12 years younger than me. And we're talking about, there's no social media, there's no school shootings, there's no, there's one trans monologue, and it's problematic at best. And it's just, a lot of people were saying to me, well, my trans friends don't want to come because they don't feel welcome in this space. And you also had the producers going on beforehand to say, specifically women and people with vaginas. So it's like they have to update the opening and closing to be more inclusive. And once again, that is not to say that Eve Ensler created a bad piece, but it is to say that it was a little bit niche, and there are other people who are like, well, why can't I talk about what I've been through? Why am I not represented in this show? Why isn't there a monologue about being of color except to call, my vagina a coochie snorcher? Like, we need more, something maybe a little more serious about what that's like. So I felt like instead of doing the Eve Ensler thing of interviewing people and then trying to piece together, I would try to find as many voices as I could and have them write their own words and then write some of my own pieces as well.
And it turned out fantastic.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Though I will admit, I think I have to go to the dentist because I think I got a couple of cavities.
Oh, yeah.
No, you talking about your relationships was absolutely awesome and very sweet.
That's another thing that's not very well represented in media in general is poly relationships. So I try to emphasize what that's like because there are a lot of people who are like, well, how does poly work? Or as Callie asked recently, what is your Google Calendar like? So, most people think it's, oh, well, you're married and you also want to sleep with other people. It's like, no, I have individual relationships with my partners and they're completely different from each other. So I really wanted to emphasize that. And especially Devin, who is not also a content creator and is not always out there trying to be visible. They pretty much just enjoy being around me for some reason. So I made an entire chapter for them because some people were like, well, why don't you ever write anything about Devin? It's like, because they don't really want me to. They're completely happy.
Sorry.
I was just thinking, going back to you talking about how the vagina monologues almost just need to be updated. And it's like they were created, was it 20 years ago, 30 years ago?
I believe it was in the 90s.
Yeah, so it's like there's a lot of things from the 90s that at the time were fantastic. Mm-hmm. But we do, society has moved forward. We've moved forward. We've grown. We've learned. It doesn't, I like what you said, how it doesn't make it bad. It just means we need new stuff.
Mm-hmm. And, the trans monologue they have, like I said, it's a little bit problematic. It still revolves around the idea that one is defined by their vagina. And it's like, that's not what made me a woman. That's not right. What most of our experience is. It's like, because the opening line feels creepy because it says, the first time I saw a vagina was when I was changing my sister's diaper. It's like, that's not really.
Yeah, I've admittedly never sat or, attended a vagina monologues or anything else, but yeah, I realize it's not intentionally creepy, but it does kind of have a.
Yeah, and.
No thanks.
It also revolves around, oh, I was beaten, I was whatever, and I had to overcompensate and all that. And of course, it's a straight trans woman. So, there's that whole aspect too. And once again, I'm not saying that it's entirely, worth throwing out. But the fact is, it just doesn't represent a lot of people. And it does get a lot of conversations started. And it is really, there are still some pieces that are really relevant. But there are an awful lot of people who feel left out. So I decided to try to make something like that would include a lot more people. At least half the writers are trans. More than 66% are queer of some flavor, and more than 10 of them are people of color. So that was the idea of, the subtitle of the book is a series of monologues from the previously unheard. And that was the point, to sort of boost them.
Yeah, I like the diversity and the inclusivity that's included in the book. And I think my favorite part is, as you said, it's in their words. Mm-hmm. It's like you're not interpreting what they say through your lens and through your, like, filtering it through you. Like, you're getting what they want to say out. And that was wonderful.
I feel like people misinterpret intersectionality as some kind of hierarchy of oppression, and it's not. It's simply saying, you probably have a different experience than I do. And I don't feel like it's my place to take someone's experience and interpret it. It's like, well, here, you tell them. If I can use the minuscule platform that I have to help you tell your story, I'm going to do that rather than telling people what I think your story is.
Yeah, there is Mandisa Thomas's story. It's like, I obviously can't fully identify with that as a white woman, but I could identify with part of it as, somebody who doesn't meet the stereotypical, sexual ideal of the country. Like, so it was great, like, reading all these stories and going, okay, I don't want to completely identify with this, but I do kind of identify with this, and just pulling out meaning out of each story.
Yeah.
It was great.
And
even just the things that I can't identify with, having it said in their own words and trying to, not trying to sympathize and be like, okay, this is what they went through.
Yeah, I can be aware of it.
Yes, this is the acknowledgement of it, and like, okay, this is how this happened. Now, how can I try and make sure this doesn't happen again, in my presence at least?
Right, and there was, especially including trans men and non-binary folk. Like, I can imagine, Aiden came to the show with me, and it's like the only mention of trans men was, like I said, in the opening precept. And MB folks like my friend Aaron or like Devin or people who are AFAB but don't identify as women, they don't have a place in that show, and I don't feel like that's right.
No, it sounds like what you've written is basically take two.
Pretty much. And it's not like the vagina monologue sucks. No,
it was a start.
It really was.
Yeah, and it's so I feel like we should have music right now, and we're not having
I know. Watching the countdown timer on air going, oh, it's almost time for break.
I know. Oh, there we go. But please stay with us through the break, and we'll return to Atheist Talk with Maddie Love, Stephanie Zavan, and Marissa Alexa McCool. I'm Hertzie Hertz, and you're listening to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Welcome back to AM 950 KTNF, the progressive voice of Minnesota. You're tuned in to Atheist Talk, and I'm your host, Hertzie Hertz, in studio to talking today's guests, Maddie Love, Marissa Alexa McCool, and Stephanie Zavan. Before we get back, however, I want to remind everyone listening live that immediately following this program, you can listen to American Atheist Viewpoint, an official production of American Atheist. Please note you can catch American Atheist Viewpoint by subscribing to the podcast version in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or the podcast player of your choice. As for the here and now, if you'd like to get involved with a conversation with Maddie, Marissa, and Stephanie, you can call us at 952-946-6205, email us at radio@mnatheist.org, or tweet us at @atheisttalk. I think we have a Facebook page too, right?
Yes, we have a Facebook page, and we've got a Facebook page and a Twitter. The only thing we're missing is Instagram and Snapchat.
I don't know if Instagram would work. At least not this morning.
No,
I think
totally
pictures are no.
It is too warm this morning. I gave Stephanie a ride in today, and I was like, I'm turning full Minnesotan right now because all I can think about is the weather. It's
either too hot or too cold.
If it reached,
actually, it's never too cold.
No,
honest,
I was going to say if it hit 30 degrees today, I would be very happy.
I think it hit 30 Celsius.
More than. Well, not yet. It will though.
All right. Well, we're having an amazing. We'll stop being Minnesotan, Marissa.
Oof, it's hot out today, eh?
Oh, yeah, sure. Don't you know?
I am Thor.
Hey, Thor.
Hey, Loki. Sorry.
I don't want to get help.
On topic. Marissa, did you find that you had to do any work to persuade people to contribute? That people who maybe, their voices haven't been asked for, you had to convince them that somebody was listening, or was everybody really eager to contribute at this point?
I think the most difficult part in that regard was there were several people who wanted to remain anonymous, and especially one in particular was about her life living under an abusive marriage and how she used building her house and arranging things in her house as her escape because she had nothing else. She didn't know anybody. She was young, religious, and, sort of married off at like age 17 or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Was that the one who she didn't leave her house for 6 months?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that was a powerful, powerful piece.
Yeah. And, she's still religious and connected to her family, so of course she didn't want her name published with that. She's a PhD candidate at University of Minnesota, and she didn't want anything connected to that because I'm sure she doesn't want her parents to know both that and that she's gay. So there's there were some difficulties like that I had to work through, and to make sure that people would be safe. There was even one writer who wrote one piece with their name attributed to it, and another that they didn't. So I don't feel like anybody was hesitant to be heard. I feel like they were more hesitant to attach their name with brutal honesty, because even still, women and non-men being honest about themselves can encourage and perpetuate violence against them.
Sorry, that was just like right after.
Say, I can kill a conversation, can I?
That was maybe a slightly more sober answer than I was expecting, but yes.
Well, it was just reading through it, and some of these stories, honestly, like I had to step back and go, okay, I'm going to read this story, but I can't read it right now. Yeah. I'm not in the right frame of mind. Like they're powerful, and I think that they're stories that need to be told, and they need to, more than needing to be told, I think they need to be heard.
Yeah.
I just hope that the people that need to hear them.
Well, another example of one of those that is, a big content warning is Melissa Frank's. And Melissa Frank is a non-binary person up in Duluth. And in December, their 19-year-old son was murdered. And their piece is in a lot of detail about what they were going through, especially their experience at the morgue, where they were not allowed to see him because of that. And I remember reading part of what they wrote, where they said the coroner said they could pull the sheet off of a hand. That was all they would be allowed to see to say goodbye. And they said, that image would have haunted me for the rest of my life. And I remember thinking, that image is haunting me for the rest of my life. I can't imagine being told that about my own child. One of the weird coincidences, too, is that another writer, because this was the first time I wrote a book that writers I didn't even know reached out to me. And there was another writer not connected to me in any way who wrote in and also wanted to write about her son who was murdered, and he was the same age and murdered in the same way. So it was like, they were both 19, and it was chilling. So I made sure the book was dedicated to both of those, because 19-year-old kids just being murdered. And of course, we often talk about how frustrating it is for the gun debate, and every time there's a school shooting, which I'm sure there's been one since this conversation started, which is depressing. But what makes it even worse is having your own child be murdered, and then people telling you that you aren't allowed to participate in the gun debate, or, any of the cliches. It's like, it's frustrating enough, and imagine adding that to it. Imagine having your son shot with a shotgun at point blank range and someone telling you that your position in the gun debate is invalid. And Melissa spoke at the March for Our Lives up in Duluth, and a lot of their speech is what's in the book. And I knew what most of that speech was going to be, and I was still wrecked. Because even in that platform, I even remember during the Women's March, there were an awful lot of people who were like, oh, trans women, you can have your own march. This isn't about you. Or, women of color, this isn't about you. This is about a bunch of white cis women getting together. This is our time. There was a lot of that gatekeeping that we often talk about. And Melissa chose their platform to not only talk about their son, but made sure to say, Black Lives Matter and LGBT rights matter. And, when someone is given a platform like that, they can make it all about themselves, and they chose not to. And I've always tried to live by that as well. I could have just made this book about trans women, but I don't feel like that would have been genuine to how many different people out there have these kind of experiences.
Well, and it wouldn't be true to the title of the book. I mean, it would in part, because trans women's voices, should be heard and their story should be heard too. But it would be such a narrow, focus.
Mm-hmm. And even within trans women, there are drastically different experiences. I'm an economically stable trans woman who lives in a state where we're protected, and there are plenty of trans women that I know personally who don't even have their own parents' support. And even then, I'm a white trans woman. Princess Harmony, who was a queer Latinx trans woman. It's like, I don't have the same experiences that you do, because if trans women have it bad, trans women of color have it really bad. Their life expectancy is 35. And like Princess Harmony is another one who I had the weirdest connection to. I went to the same community college as her before I transitioned. So it was like, I found her in a book. Like, I found her in a book. I'm like, I know that name. Oh my God, I went to school with her.
Well, we will return with our guests, Marissa, Stephanie, and Maddie, right after the break. Please stay with us. I'm Hertzie Hertz, and you're listening to Atheist Talk on KTNF AM 950. Thank you for tuning in to Atheist Talk on AM 950 KTNF. I'm your host, Hertzie Hertz, and we're having what I would classify as a fascinating conversation with Maddie, Marissa, and Stephanie. Before we continue this conversation, which will be our final segment with Maddie, Stephanie, and Stephanie, there's a bit of housekeeping I need to attend to. Atheist Talk is produced with the funding from Minnesota Atheist Cucumbers Restaurants in Edina, Minnesota. Please consider visiting our sponsors. Did I do it again?
You said Maddie, Stephanie, and Stephanie.
It's okay. I'll just talk a lot.
Nah. I'm sorry. It's morning. I haven't had enough coffee.
That's okay. You can talk, Hertzie.
I see.
With Cucumbers is an awesome restaurant, and everyone should go at least once. But if you do go, let them know that you appreciate their support of Atheist Talk and you'd like them to advertise on the program and help keep us on the air. And please, if you'd like to help keep us on the air with advertising, please just contact us at radio@mnatheist.org. I also want to note our dedicated group of volunteers and the generous donations of you, our listeners. You'll help keep Atheist Talk on the air in podcast form. I also want to note our donors of the week, which we actually don't really have one, so I would like to thank all of our donors. And if you are able to help with a donation, please consider doing so at our Radio Fund page or our Patreon at www.patreon.com/atheisttalk. Minnesota Atheist is a 501c3 tax-deductible organization, and we couldn't do the show without you, and we deeply appreciate your support. Music for Atheist Talk is by composer and member Brent Michael Davis and is used with permission. Please note all opinions are the guest and host only and do not necessarily reflect those of the Minnesota Atheist organization. As always, check out the Minnesota Atheist website for podcasts of previous programs. You can browse articles, book reviews, and peruse the calendar for upcoming events. You can also sign up for the weekly email, which will give you links to upcoming events. It's a great way to stay connected to the community. If you enjoy the show and all that Minnesota Atheist has to offer, consider becoming a member of Minnesota Atheist while you're on the website. Membership has some great perks. Check out the hows and whys on the website. And with all that relevant and very useful information out of the way, let's get back to our conversation with Maddie, Marissa, and Stephanie.
You mean my name's not Stephanie?
I mean, it could be.
It could be. Yeah, if you want it. It's not a bad name.
Yeah. Are you suggesting there's something wrong with a name like Stephanie?
Absolutely not.
Okay, just wondering.
Troublemaker.
All of us.
I never make trouble.
No.
I'm going to call bull on that.
Would call the rest of it on that, but it's, live radio.
And you also have the fact that you're wearing the Secular Women's shirt, and I don't see an Outrage Brigade sticker anywhere. So you are false advertising right now.
All right. We had a question, one more question about the book, and it escaped my brain.
We were going to plug the
Yeah.
extra for Patreon.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
that was. Yes, so if you become a patron of Marissa, and which page do you just have the one patron?
I have two.
I was going to say, because I wouldn't be surprised if you had two. So which patron gets the super awesome extra content?
I would say either. I'm going to post them on either one.
So that includes the Sister getting out of hand?
Yes, that
Oh,
one's
goody.
patreon.com/QAF, and Inciting Incident is patreon.com/Inciting Incident Podcast.
Awesome.
And the Patreon for Atheist Talk is patreon.com/atheist talk.
Yes.
Don't you wish your Patreon was hot like me?
Yes, every day.
And she did that in the first Takai.
As long as it's not as hot as this studio.
Oh my gosh.
God, it is warm in here.
Are we really going back to the weather?
We're
This is
Minnesotans,
Minnesota.
okay? We can't stop.
Did nobody warn you before you moved?
Apparently not.
What do they talk about in Pennsylvania?
Not the weather. Mostly how they're going to beat up people who don't look like them. But,
Yeah.
Okay, so isn't the weather at least a step up?
it absolutely is. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying, are we really going back to that right now?
Well, speaking of the weather and changing in weather depending on where you are, I hear you have a live show in Chicago.
We sure do. And it'll be June 23rd at the Den Theater in downtown Chicago. And because atheism sometimes has a problem with realizing there are people other than white cishet men who can speak about atheism,
What?
I know that's a shock. We decided to have our live episode include no white men. So Bethany and I, a trans woman and a queer cis woman, host, and our guests will be Jenica Crail of the podcast Real Life Beyond Faith. We will have Mandisa Thomas, who is the founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, Alex Jules, who is friggin' amazing. If you don't know who Alex Jules is, I kind of feel sorry for you, and Stephanie. So,
Oh, right. That's why I'm here.
yeah.
I was wondering about that. No, I'm kidding.
I just snuck into the studio.
You snuck into my car first.
Like not in the back seat kind of way. Like just
No.
like not like just strangling.
No, actually, it
No,
was
like
kind of
she
cool.
had to move her purse.
Oh, okay.
Very sneaky.
And I pulled up too.
Yeah.
It's a surprise attack.
Sorry.
I mean, we did a live show for 100, and Minnesota people might know the name Chris Cluey. We had him there. I flew him out from California, and like everybody else, I was just like, oh, you're just here so I can pretend that this is not me just trying to talk to Chris Cluey on a public stage. So, and I'm pretty gay. I'm mostly into women, but I would go straight for Chris Cluey any day.
Admittedly, he is the only person who's got me quasi-interested in football.
Yeah, and he doesn't even play football anymore. Now he makes role-playing card games, so probably more up your alley.
You can follow Chris Cluey on Twitter
Fritzy has
at
been
Warcraft.
stunned into silence.
Freeze take.
Yeah, it's like I have to get back to. It's like don't geek out. So why Chicago? Because I mean, here we have so many theaters.
Well, because when we did number 100, I was still living in Pennsylvania, and we had the show in Pennsylvania. So we figured, why not have it where Bethany lives? And Bethany is, I don't know if she runs it or if she's just very involved with Chicago atheists, but I know she's pretty active with that. So it was, okay, it's your turn. We'll have one in your area. You know, you can find the right theater, and you can help with all the questions of where people should go for hotels, because I spent so much trying to coordinate people flying in, because Thomas Smith and Chris Cluey flew in from California, and I had Noah and the crew driving down from New York, and 8 guests plus Bethany and a theater. It was a lot to coordinate, and then when they started asking questions like, what hotel did we stay at? Brain melt. So it's like, Bethany, you handle that part.
Yes, I was gonna say you are probably one of the few people who can get me to go to Chicago again.
I've heard that more than once.
I have family in Chicago.
Understood.
So, Hertzie, it sounds like we need to talk to Bethany about which hotel we should stay at.
There you go.
Excellent. Stephanie, you on board with asking Bethany? We should just like all message her at once, 3 different messages.
I think we should all sit at brunch and everybody text her.
Bethany, if you're listening, I'm sorry. Not really, but
And now the exciting part of the show, coordinating hotels for an out-of-state trip. How about that weather, eh?
Hey, for Minnesotans, that can be riveting in the middle of winter.
I'm sure it can.
Also hearing about the warm weather, because it's like, right, that's around the corner.
Yeah, this was my first winter in Minnesota since 2010, I think. 2010 or 2011, whatever. And I went down to Florida in December, and it just so happened to be the same weekend that it snowed in Atlanta. So, like, I went to the south, and it was cold there, too. So, there's my weather contribution. You happy?
Very. So where can people find tickets to this amazing show?
They can find it on the Den Theater website or on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Inciting Incident Podcast. There's a link there, but it's directly through the theater page, so it should be very easy to find. Like,
Admittedly, it was easy to find.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then
very
easy to do.
Yes.
Yep.
Because I think it was last week you were giving me heck about that.
Well, of course.
Yes. Don't worry. I'll be there.
Yeah, I bought my tickets before I knew whether or not I could have the time off work.
Yeah, technically I haven't done the actual PTO's part yet.
Well, yeah, and we are actually going to try to do a live atheist talk show
Yeah.
from Chicago.
Oh, yes. Eric is just like looking, going, oh, crap.
So what you're saying is you can be recording live. No.
I didn't know Tom was in studio today.
Well, we will be in Chicago.
That is actually true. Oh, gosh. How many people could you think we could handle on Skype?
Well, I only have 4 mics, and my soundboard only has 4 channels, or has 8 channels, but only for 4
We can
mics.
share.
Oh, yeah, we'll totally share.
I'll share with Heath.
Well, Heath
I'll
isn't in
share with any of
Chicago.
them.
Heath's not coming to Chicago?
Well, I doubt it. I mean, he likes me, but not that much. Oh, and funny little anecdote. If Heath Enright ever offers you a cup of coffee that he made, you take it. I don't even like coffee, and Heath made the best cup of coffee I've ever had. So,
Are we talking like better than...
yes.
Okay, that works.
The best cup of coffee I have ever had.
Not
That's
like world's
impressive.
best coffee, because I see that a lot.
I'm saying my best coffee, so your experience may vary.
Usually it's in diners. I see world's best coffee. Or Seattle's best coffee. It's like, no, that is not Seattle's best coffee.
No, Seattle's best coffee is in Seattle.
Not in the package I bought.
No.
Or McDonald's or whoever sells Seattle's best coffee.
Is it the Starbucks?
I don't know. Yeah, Starbucks in Seattle. Yeah, I think this conversation got off topic.
We went
Slightly.
I mean, I could go back on the rails, but I don't know.
All right, so your live show for the Inciting Incident. So, because like I really want to know what to look forward to. Is it essentially kind of like what's in this book, people getting up to speak, or is it just like listening to a live taping of
Better
Inciting
not be
Incident?
people getting up to speak. I haven't been told to prepare anything.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be live interviews.
Well.
If you go back and listen to the 100th episode, it was in 2 parts, and we had the first guest on for 20 minutes, the second on for 20 minutes, and then group discussion with all of them, and then we did that twice. So with just 4 people, it'll probably be first person, second person, and then halftime in the middle, and then repeat. And then we, of course, had a Q&A with the audience and everybody involved at the end, so a chance to hear from a good variety of perspectives, which is also what my book does. Amazing.
Nice plug.
Yeah, I'm subtle. I'm as subtle as a train wreck.
Are we gonna get a halftime show?
No. Well, maybe.
Not even like an intermission dance, like hot dogs dancing on the screen. With
Absolutely no
Let's
one
all
wants to
go
see me
the
dance.
lobby.
I know you've got a lot of people who are guests with performing backgrounds, though.
That is true. Maybe I'll get Pris out there with her acoustic guitar. Because, I got to tell you, Pris is the queen of big leaguing. Do you know what big leaguing means? So, like, when you say, oh, yeah, I really like someone, and they're like, yeah, I had dinner with them this one time or whatever. I had Paramore on my car radio yesterday, and she's like, oh, yeah, I performed that song with Paramore live for a theater. And it's like, oh, your one-upsman game ship is strong.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah, Pris played guitar with Paramore. That's a thing that happened.
That's just awesome. Nothing will beat for me. Intermission was seeing The Offspring, and their intermission was just somebody standing up dancing with bubbles and a G-string.
I went to a Cleveland Cavaliers playoff game last year, and the halftime show was Montel Jordan, and I was like, oh, look at my watch, 1994 already.
Okay, if we do one, we'll do it better than that.
I was going to say that probably doesn't take all that much. But thank you for tuning in to Atheist Talk, and we'd love to you for joining us next Sunday, which should be another exciting episode.
Bye.